accountability artifact, I'm going to be creating a video, some sort of, you can interpret it as like a training or informational video geared towards teachers. And it's going to be talking all about high leverage practice number 4, which comes from chapter 4 of the textbook High Leverage Practices for Intensive Interventions. Um, Very interesting and insightful read. But before we get into high leverage practice number 4, just want to go over some general background information relating to the different HLPs for this week. Um, so I've created a little bit of a slideshow to help organize my thoughts and provide a nice visual to look at. All right, so the this week's readings deal with assessment high leverage practices. Um, To quote directly from the textbook, quote, to implement effective intensive interventions for students with disabilities, special education teachers must be adept at collecting and using assessment data and information that allows them to design and evaluate students' needs while capitalizing on their assets, end quote. So some of these assets, for example, might include a student's personal interests, their areas of strength, um, family and community supports, and a student's home culture. So, as teachers, we should try to leverage those in our planning for instruction or intervention. Furthermore, collecting and interpreting this information requires educators to utilize the collaboration high leverage practices, as they must work with other professionals and family members. So yes, this reflects and connects back to all the different communication high leverage practices, such as planning and facilitating successful IEP meetings. Collaborating with both professionals and parents, families, students, and etc. And this is really interesting because one of the videos talked about, quote, the high leverage practices do not exist in a vacuum, they all work together, end quote. So hopefully with this little presentation I can help elucidate that and really show the connection between this week's high leverage practice and the different communication ones. So for this week, the high leverage practice number 4 is use multiple sources of information to develop a comprehensive understanding of a student's strength and needs. Uh, so some key features of that include multiple sources of data. So that's really important because effectively teaching students, regardless, who they are, but especially important for students with disabilities, requires collection, aggregation, and interpretation of multiple forms of data in order to create a comprehensive understanding of a student's strength and needs and properly plan instruction and monitor student performance. So in order to collect these multiple sources of data, you might need a multiple forms of data collection. So multiple sources of assessments for students to do. Um, Yeah, in fact, the IDEA states teachers and schools must use multiple sources of information to develop a comprehensive understanding of student strength and needs when planning. Following that, no discrimination. It's very important that these tests are as free from as much discrimination as possible. Tests cannot be discriminatory. The IDEA states that, quote, assessments and other evaluation materials used to assess a child under this part are selected and administered so as not to be discriminatory on a racial or cultural bias, end quote. Um, it's very important not to be discriminatory. We need to be able to expand kind of our interpretive power of these results so as we not to see our students with a deficit uh, framing. It's important not to see differences as deficits because that can negatively cloud our judgment and lead us to create kind of ill thought out decisions or plans of action. Um, so very important to not be discriminatory with the tests we make students take. Following that, it talks about assessment as a process, which I'll get into over here. So assessment as a process. So a way to think of this is that assessment is a continuous process, and effective assessment requires multiple sources of data, and then you take that data to guide instructional decision making. For example, if you look at the little chart over here I'm circling, you start off at number one. What do we know? This is a part of a you know a little model to show that assessment is kind of an iterative cyclical cycle. So what do we know? You start off by reviewing and collecting data that's already available for a student. So that could include things like reading an IEP, getting documentation from parents, etc. So after you review what you already know about a student, you move on to what do we want to know. So you take that as setting a purpose for assessment, trying to figure out why are we gathering certain sources, certain data. What decisions are we then going to make with that data? Following that, you go on to how can we find out? So once you have your purpose set in the second step, um, step three becomes a lot easier to find and figure out. So you can search and decide what sort of assessment you want to give a student, but it's important that the form of assessment reflects the purpose or need. And then after that, you move on to the final step, which is number four. What does it mean? So once data is collected, educators look across the data set for patterns. These patterns are usually evident and across measures, time, domains, and/or environments. So you'll see general patterns, and then you take that to then go back to what you already know and plan and implement different interventions. So assessment and the data from assessment is important for kind of guiding your instructional decision making. It's important for using evidence-based practices. So for data collection, there are a variety of different sorts of assessments that you could give students. They might be formal, they might be informal, they might be standardized, they might not be. But some basic things would be observations, interviews, classroom-based assessments, curriculum-based measures, and teacher or other professional reports. These are just a couple of examples. I'm sure there's plenty more. And then moving on to final thoughts. So, overall, it's really important to use assessment as a framing for our planning and instructional decision making. Additionally, it's important that we keep families in the loop and collaborate with them during this process. I want to read a quote from the textbook because I thought it was really interesting. It's a little bit a long one though. But quote, knowledge of students and their families' backgrounds can provide relevant information that helps teachers be informed when selecting and interpreting assessment data. A teacher who does not understand the goals families have for their children or how to recognize and value families' cultural background and students' view of their background is in danger of misinterpreting information regarding the challenges students face and may miss critical information about students' motivations and interests that can help interpret assessment results and design instruction, end quote. So once again, it is very important to kind of expand our interpretive power through because that allows us to more easily see and accurately understand a student's background and how that might influence their assessment results, and that will give us more of an accurate sort of an appropriate step forward when we are designing you know, uh, you know, uh, curriculum or um, interventions or any sort of decision making. Um, but this also helps reinforce the different high leverage practices related to collaboration. So it's very important that we collaborate with parents and students. Maybe their whole family as a whole. So it's very important to keep that in mind.